Hello, and thanks for joining our webcast. I'm Brad Kaplan, Director of Marketing for Data Networks, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Elizabeth Evans with the Grants Office. Elizabeth helps school districts, colleges, and universities find and successfully apply for tech-friendly grants. She'll be presenting today's webcast. If you have questions for Elizabeth, we'll collect them throughout the session and answer them at the end. And with that, I'll turn it over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Brad. So today I've got 6 things that I'd like to go over with y'all. First and foremost, we're going to talk about the sources and types of grant funds, then kind of move into how to identify viable grant opportunities. And then I'll give you a nice foundation for the landscape of grant seeking. And then we'll talk about some tips for including technology in your next grant proposal, things to think about. Then I want to talk about a specific grant opportunity that opened up just last week, the Innovative Approaches to Literacy Grant Program from the Department of Education. And we'll wrap things up by offering 10 tips for proposal success and talk about the services available to you through the Ingram MicroGrant Support Program. So when we're looking at grant funds, the sources can be usually broken down into 3 categories: federal, state, and foundation. The largest by far in terms of overall funding are those opportunities put forth by the federal government. These opportunities also tend to be more competitive and also usually have the most complex application process as well. State agency funded opportunities in contrast, those tend to be a little less competitive, if only for the fact that applicants are limited to the specific state that is hosting the opportunity. These funds also tend to be a little more limited in quantity as well. And then finally, rounding out the list, we have private and corporate foundations. These grants, they run the gambit from small to large in award size and are just as varied in terms of competitiveness. That said, if you are new to grants and looking to cut your teeth, as they say, then private local foundation requests are the best place to start. They usually have fewer requirements for application and are often able to turn around award funding much faster than the state and federal agencies. And then really quickly, I just want to give you a quick smattering of some of those federal agencies that we tend to see funding K-12 education grant opportunities for the most part. So the Department of Education is by far the largest, obviously, but many other departments also devote a considerable amount of funding towards K-12 opportunities. Largest among them would be the Department of Labor, the National Science Foundation, and the USDA. To a lesser extent, the EPA, the NOAA, DHS, DOD, DOE, and NASA also provide K-12 oriented opportunities. In each instance, the department targets their K-12 education efforts on something relevant to their agency's mission. So for example, the DOD may offer workforce development grant opportunities that funds projects involving student interests in military careers. Or we see school safety initiatives being funded through DHS grants, while the Department of Energy, on the other hand, may offer a grant opportunity for students who want to engage in alternative fuels or alternative energy education and research related projects. Now, when we think about grant funding for education, what probably comes to mind first and foremost is what is considered a competitive grant, but often forgotten are those formula grant programs. Formula funding, for example, includes title programs like your Title I, Title II, Title III, and so on dollars. Applications are required, but the amount that you receive is based on a calculation, and you can usually estimate what that award amount is going to be year after year. As a result, districts can sometimes find themselves in what I call a rut, wherein because they can predict exactly how much money they expect to get from year to year, they build their remaining budget around these formula funds, assuming that the funds will be a constant. They might actually stop critically reflecting and considering how their title funds are being used, and if perhaps these formula funds could be assigned more effectively. Competitive state funds, on the other hand, are probably more in line with what you think of when you think of a grant opportunity. They also require an application, but the project plan, budget, narrative, etc., are all scored, and only those with the highest scores are going to be the funded projects. Excuse me. And now, of course, some competitive grants do take on a formulaic element, say, for example, determining the award size based on the population served. But the point here is that formula funding is predictable and that the application process is more of a formality than anything else, while competitive funding actually involves some risk. You may or may not be funded no matter how much effort you put forth. So with that, hopefully I've laid the groundwork for you to have a foundational understanding of grant funding, or at least enough so that we can move on and start talking about how to identify some viable grant opportunities. Now, I imagine if you're listening today, you've probably already got some specific project areas churning around inside your mind regarding grant funding, but what to do, how to navigate the plethora of opportunities that are available, besides just looking at the funding priorities or areas of interest. How do you know which opportunity is the best fit for your district and your specific project? Well, the first thing to do when cracking open a specific grant opportunities guidance, solicitation, proposal, preparation instructions, or request for proposal document, whatever the funder has chosen to call that document, is to look at the eligibility. If you don't meet the funder's requirements for eligibility, then simply move on to the next one. The old adage is true here. There are plenty of other fish in the sea. And if you are unsure about eligibility requirements, if it doesn't immediately jump out to you, then just simply set that opportunity aside to review in further detail later, or contact the funding agency to clarify whether or not you're eligible. You also want to figure out if a partnership is required, and if so, take some time to reflect on what your options are. What existing relationships might you be able to leverage, or who in your area might you be able to form a new relationship with? Trying to get a solid commitment from those partners in the form of a memorandum of understanding, which outlines exactly what their role is going to be within the project, is very beneficial. Most funders are going to eventually require this document when submitting a proposal anyways, so the sooner you're able to hammer out those details, the better, especially if a partnership is a required element or a strongly suggested requirement, a strongly suggested element to the project. And then also take a look at the project size that you're planning and the total number of awards and the amount of funding available for the grant that you're looking at. Will your project's budget actually fit in line with the average award size? The number of awards being granted, as an aside, is also an excellent indicator of how competitive that opportunity may be. Are there 3 awards expected or 20? Checking for the requirements related to matching funds is another essential component. Does your organization have the ability to meet these requirements, or could you leverage outside support to provide that match on your behalf? Again, thinking about those partners that we discussed previously. Another thing you could do when thinking about the match is think about what you can offer in kind as well. Some grants don't actually require a strict monetary match, so you might actually have more to offer through in-kind matching than you think. So the moral of the story is don't toss it out just because you see an initial description saying that a match is required. Dig in a bit and see what actually goes into that match and what is allowed. Furthermore, again, this is an excellent opportunity, as I mentioned, to partner up with your local foundations or other entities. Thinking about local foundations specifically, oftentimes we see those local foundations or businesses be very happy to get involved and provide matching funds for a project because it's a relatively easy way for that organization to tack their name onto an even larger project than they would normally be able to fund on their own. So they get the bragging rights, but they don't have to put up quite as much effort, which is nice. And they still get to say, hey, look what we helped make possible. You also want to be sure to read over the application's submission process for the grant to know if it's a good fit. What type of supporting documentation is going to be needed? Is your organization going to be required to have any special proof of designation, such as a SAMS number? Making sure that you have these things in place early is key. So keeping with the SAMS number example, if your number has expired and you wait too long to reapply for renewal, then you may not actually get that renewal number in time for the deadline. It can take up to 2 or 3 weeks at longest. And so considering how long that process can take, you want to make sure to work backwards from there, make sure you have enough time to get all those documents pulled together. Also consider how long is the requirement for the narrative. Is it going to be 5, 10, 15, 60 pages? Depending on the funding agency, these lengths are going to be varied, and the narrative length doesn't always necessarily correspond to the award amount because sometimes a concise proposal may actually yield you more money than a longer, more complicated one. But the key here is making sure that you have the ability to take on preparing a document of the length that is required and pulling together, again, all that necessary information that will have to be part of it. So definitely keep track of your calendar in relation to sorting through the grant opportunities. You'll also want to consider your project's feasibility. Do you have the ability to accomplish everything that the grant funder expects as part of the award? Oftentimes there is this perception that grants are an easy way of getting free money, and this is definitely not the case. As I said earlier, grants, they are offered to address specific needs. So funders expect to see some sort of improvement or an outcome to the project that they have helped support. As such, seriously, you want to ask yourself, can you meet their expectations, or will it be a challenge? One thing that I tend to see in novice grant writers who go into a project with the free money mindset and are awarded, they sometimes find themselves overwhelmed when it comes to award administration. So be sure that you and your team are fully prepared to take on those responsibilities, that you're well versed in the reporting requirements for the funder before you even start to apply. That way you don't get too far down the rabbit hole. And also, again, I can't emphasize this enough, look at your calendar, watch your calendar. The more time you have to prepare, the less stress for yourself and everyone else involved with the project. If your opportunity requires a partnership, the more time you have to build and strengthen that coalition, the better. Ample lead time is essential so that there's enough time to navigate not only your own organization's internal approval system, but also theirs. So for example, colleges and universities, they might add on 2 or 3 weeks to the process. Further, the more lead time that you have to prepare your project plan, the better. You can actually consider every aspect and detail so that nothing slips through the cracks. The goal here being that when the application window is actually open, you want to spend those 30 to 60 days drafting your proposal, not actually planning the project itself. Otherwise, it's kind of like trying to fly the plane while you're building it at the same time. It's stressful and it's not enjoyable for anybody involved. And finally, consider the funder's past. Do you have a past relationship with them where you funded a project either last year or 10 years ago? You can sometimes use that to help keep your foot in the door. Also look at who else they've funded and what types of projects they were awarding grants to. Being aware of the grant funder's grant-making history will help you determine if your project's goals are in line with the types of projects the funding organization actually has an interest and history of funding. Further, take a look at the past requirements for the proposals from previous years. If you have identified an opportunity and it is an annual opportunity or biannual opportunity. For most of those annual and biannual grant opportunities, the main focus of the grant is not going to change, nor will the logistical details or documentation required. So the only thing that may change would be specific priorities, wherein 1 or 2 are swapped out for something new, especially for those grants looking for innovation. So a great way to get ahead of the curve, and again, making use of your time and your calendar, get ahead of that curve by start brainstorming your ideas now using that previous guidance. That way, as I said before, when the actual new request or the new proposal drops, you're ready to put pen to paper. All you have to do is go through and cross your T's, dot your I's, double check that everything's still in line. And in case you need some help with your brainstorming, I really quickly want to talk about some of the technologies and grant project areas that we frequently see funded. And so first, let's take a look at the type of technology being funded. Usually I break the technology down into 3 categories. The first area is classroom and instructional tools. Here we see tablets, laptops, desktops, smartboards, specialized STEM technologies like robotics, etc. being funded. This is usually the immediate thing that comes to mind when you think of educational technology, and by far the most straightforward because these are the actual tactile devices that students and teachers are interacting with. The next type of technology that we see funded are the non-tactile tools, such as software or other tools for productivity. Here, classroom dashboards or online management systems tend to come into play. There can even be a bit of overlap with classroom technology side of things, wherein these productivity tools involve learning programs or platforms that allow for students and teachers to receive real-time feedback on the actual students' grasping of content. These non-tactile technologies could also include any other type of supporting software for the tactile devices too, so apps and things like that. And finally, we have the connectivity and the data storage devices. These are the behind-the-scenes education technologies, the routers, the switches, the Wi-Fi devices, and so on. These technologies tend to be the foundational infrastructure on which everything else is built. So for example, data storage for a multitude of student data being collected and analyzed, could be built into a project. Or alternatively, if you have a one-to-one initiative and you're getting devices for the entire school, but you don't necessarily have the network to support that, you could build in Wi-Fi connectivity. So very quickly you can see how if you find the right technology-friendly grant, you can actually build a pretty comprehensive technology project from the foundational infrastructure up through the actual tactile technologies that are in direct contact with the classroom as part of it. And what kinds of programmatic areas support these technologies? Well, the answer is a whole lot. We see everything from after-school, summer school activities to dropout prevention or educational enrichment activities such as the arts, music, dance, theater. Of course, the core content areas, literacy, STEM education, for example. We see school safety projects involving technology, college career readiness, workforce development type projects as well. And then also, if you're partnering up with research institutions sometimes, we can see technology being built in for testing out innovative new approaches or techniques within education, finding out whether or not a specific intervention is a best practice and should be disseminated outwards, or again, leveraging that university research, how the education practice actually takes place itself. But with all of that, the big question is, how do you really know if a grant is truly technology friendly? After all, some of the best technology funding opportunities don't at first blush seem like technology grants. And so, well, first and foremost, and this should be rather obvious, I'm sure, is to determine if the grant is actually good for you, check the guidance, as we were talking about earlier. In most instances, if you flip to the budget section, you will see wording on allowable expenses or unallowable expenses covered by the grant. Additionally, look at the grant's funding priorities. Sometimes you can actually get a sense for what kinds of technologies might be appropriate to ask for, if any, based on the priorities. So for example, if a grant funds professional development for teachers through partnerships with districts and higher education institutions, you may be able to fund distance learning equipment, such as those technologies used for video conferencing, cameras, projectors, etc. Now, reading between the lines can sometimes be a bit tricky and shouldn't be the only means by which you use to know if a grant is technology friendly. But if the allowable expenses are unclear or unstated, reading between the lines in conjunction with what I'm about to say next can actually help you get a better idea, which is to look at what has been funded in the past. Especially at the federal level. The Department of Education and the National Science Foundation often publish summary information of funded projects, and these summaries may note whether or not technology was a significant part of the project. In fact, the Department of Education often publishes the full application along with the reviewer's comments, so you can really get a good idea. But don't just stop there. Dig a bit further. Search the local news sites for information about the project that was funded too. Sometimes the local newspaper may publish a local interest piece announcing the award and follow up. They might put out follow-up articles on the project's progress as part of, again, a local interest section. So doing a bit of deep Googling can sometimes yield you with much more insight about a project than the summary provided on the funder's website alone. And also, if you're feeling brave, you can always consider reaching out to the past funded grantees to see if they want to talk about their project. Usually, if they've got the time, they're more than happy to brag about their experience and their success. So why not take advantage of that information? And finally, try asking the funder. If you still can't get a good idea of whether or not the specific technology you have in mind is fundable, then reach out and ask the funding organization. Depending on who it is, they may or may not be willing to answer immediately. They may respond right there on the phone with you then and there, or they may reply directly to your email. Alternatively, there might be a delay in response if they are planning to publish a list of FAQs, for example, based on all of the questions that they've collected. And still, others may only accept and respond to questions if they're posed during specific times, such as a technical assistance webinar or an informational webinar about the grant opportunity. And so with that, now I want to tell you a little bit more about a specific grant opportunity that opened up just last week. And that program is the Innovative Approaches to Literacy Grant from the Department of Education. And this is a program that we usually see come out every year or every 2 years. They actually took last year off to retool the guidance, but before that it was an annual program. And what this program is looking to do is to fund high-quality projects that improve literacy skills for students birth through grade 12 who live in the attendance boundaries of high-need schools. And the types of high-quality projects the department is interested in funding are those which are supported by evidence of strong theory, meaning that you develop a logic model to justify your project and that this logic model is supported by some type of empirical evidence. So basically what the department wants you to do is to show that you have some level of intentionality behind your proposed project by going into their What Works Clearinghouse or some other place where you can find peer-reviewed studies. I'm a fan of the ERIC database, for example, and use those findings or those journal articles as the basis for your practice. Now, in years past, this program has funded pretty much anything you can think of under the umbrella of literacy, book distribution, and childhood literacy. So just a few quick examples. That includes print and electronic literacy resources, parent and family engagement efforts, including teaching families how to engage their children in meaningful literacy experiences at home, education intervention for readers, joint PD for teachers, school leadership, library personnel, and even literacy-rich academic and enrichment activities that are aligned to college and career standards for your specific state. Now this year there's one absolute priority that every applicant must address, which is, in case it wasn't already clear from what I said earlier, having a high quality plan for innovative approaches to literacy. That includes book distribution, childhood literacy activities, or both, and that is supported at a minimum by evidence of strong theory. But the department has also issued 3 competitive priorities, which, if you address as part of your project, could yield you up to 15 additional points at the time of application review, because each competitive priority is worth up to 5 points. And these priorities are: 1, leveraging technology to support instructional practice and professional development. So basically, you would want to be sure to leverage technology through using specifically high-speed internet access and devices to increase student and teacher access to high-quality digital tools, assessments, materials, and so on, particularly the open source ones. The second competitive priority is improving early learning and development outcomes, wherein your project focuses on supporting students birth through grade 3 by increasing access to early learning and developmental programs. It supports professional development for early childhood workers and also helping to sustain the learning for ECE students through the early elementary years. And then finally, the third competitive priority is serving rural LEAs, which is pretty self-explanatory. Odds are you already know if you fit into this category or not. Now, when we're looking at, again, who is eligible for this opportunity, it would be those high-need districts, which is defined as a district with no less than 25% of its students ages 5 to 17, coming from families with low incomes, which fall below the poverty line. But it could be a single high-need district, or it could be a high-need district in consortium with a national nonprofit organization, or it could be a consortium of many of these entities. It kind of just depends on what's best for you, your region, your project. But it is fairly wide open so long as you're meeting that high-need district first and foremost. And at the base level, which I suspect most folks would be going after unless you've already been awarded a grant and you're looking to go to the next size up, we've got about 30 awards expected, coming in around $50,000 or $500,000, excuse me, as the average award size, but it could be as low as $175,000 up to $750,000. Again, if you want to kick it up an extra notch and you feel like you really want to go the distance, they are offering larger awards, particularly for the larger projects that are going to involve consortiums of multiple entities. Here they expect to make 2 to 6 awards, ranging between $1.5 and $5 million, but the average will probably be around $3 million. And with this opportunity, it opened last week, April 7th, but time is quickly approaching for that May 9th deadline. They gave us about a month to apply to it. So we want to hit the ground running if possible. And if this is of interest, definitely go to grants.gov and download the application package and take a look, and let us know if you want to get together and talk about it as well, because we can certainly be of service. And I'll get to that a bit more in a minute. But when we're thinking about building technology, to shift gears a bit, when we're thinking about building technology into a project, first and foremost, the grant funder is going to be mostly interested in the project, not the product itself. So that's just the plain and simple truth of the matter. And time again, we see folks getting hung up on the technical specifics within their grant application and completely glossing over, or worse, neglecting the details about their actual project plan, such as how many students are going to be served, or how they plan to accomplish their goals, when key dates are for the project, and so on. So yes, you might be really excited about getting tablets, but the grant funder wants to hear how those tablets are going to be used. And so again, we want to look at the technology in question and think, what is our need, and does the technology contribute to a solution? So long as the answer is yes, then you're ready to start moving forward on a potential technology-friendly grant opportunity that aligns with your interests and your programmatic need. And actually, a great way of thinking about building technology into your project is to think about it like you're baking a cake, wherein the project is the cake and your desired technology is the egg. There are many ingredients that go into a cake, but at the end of the day, most people don't really care and are not interested in the fact that there are eggs in addition to flour and butter and so on in the cake. They're interested in that cake. And they want to hear how some of those parts are being made into something wonderful and delicious. And the same is true of grant funders. Now, they'll want to know that you've used quality ingredients, of course. So those other budget items like personnel expenses, supplies, curriculum development, possibly even PD for staff involved. But again, at the end of the day, what the funder is really looking at is the sum of all of those parts in addition to the technology, and how those different aspects, the technology, the personnel, supplies, et cetera, contribute to an overall goal that meets the funding priorities and their interests. So yeah, take stock of what your need is and be sure to develop a project that is actually addressing that programmatic need. The technology is simply a means to accomplishing the ends. And while you're taking the time to reflect on what your needs are, also think about your current resources and relationships. Think about who you can leverage as part of the project. In some cases, this may be an outside entity, which could definitely benefit from being able to share and access information with you. So keeping open the lines of communication is great. As you start to build your technology plan, your project plan, you're also going to want to make sure you're documenting everything, making sure you keep track of not just your brainstorming notes, but also quotes and specific product information. This will come in handy when you're actually having to draft the budget and help you be as specific as possible with your funder, because funders love to see specificity. So to do this, you'll want to start working with a and again, really involve your vendor in all the ins and outs of the project and make sure that the proposed solution is actually going to be able to satisfy everything you're looking for it to do. Who knows, you may actually find that they can help you bundle in other technology solutions as part of the overall grant budget in addition, as an additional bang for your buck through the grant budget. And so with that, next I want to transition into those 10 tips to wrap things up for you. And so first we have, I said it earlier, giving yourself plenty of lead time. Think about your calendar so that you're not running around like a chicken with your head cut off. Tip number 2, learn as much as possible about each program that you're going to apply to. You want to really know your funder. Go out and do your research. Next, involve others in your project, but you want to also be judicious. Have a purpose for their involvement. Don't just throw everything in to the kitchen sink. So include only partners who are able to provide you with letters of support that really demonstrate a true commitment on their part. The 4th tip, make sure that you're customizing each proposal to the requirements of the funder. This isn't like a cover letter for a job where you just have a generic template and you send it out again and again. You want to make sure you're addressing the specific details that the funder is looking for rather than shopping around the same project. The 5th tip is check to see if you can get the reviewer's comments for non-winning proposals that you've submitted and use that feedback for future proposals. So don't just look at what the successful proposals said, but again, think critically about your own proposals that you've submitted and get those reviewers' feedback. So for state and federal grants through the Freedom of Information Act, you can definitely do that. And so you may as well take advantage of that resource because you can then use it to submit a stronger application once you address those reviewers' comments. Tip 6, you want to make sure that grant seeking is part of your agency's strategy. You don't just want to put all of your eggs in one basket, and if you don't happen to make it for that one grant, say, oh, well, we're done. Grants are a process, and it can sometimes take a couple tries to get your sea legs, if you will. So, making sure that you not only have the leadership support, but that everyone's on board to support the project will not only contribute to project success if you're awarded, but also make sure that everyone understands that it is a process, and you won't see results overnight. Tip 7, being specific in your budget. I mentioned this previously, but most funders have a very generous amount of length that they allow for the budget narrative and justification. So this is really where you're going to be able to tie in exactly why the technology is a means to the end, and same with all of the other characteristics that you're building in your budget. So make sure that you really don't skimp on the details in that space. And tip 8, don't include materials other than those specifically requested by the funder. A lot of state and federal grants are already lengthy documents, and their eyes are bleeding at the end of the day after reading all of those proposals. So don't weigh them down with more than what they ask for. You want to try to be as concise as possible, but make sure you're still getting everything that's required in there and not putting in superfluous information. In tip 9, always get an outside set of eyes to edit your proposal before you submit it. Even look to people who are outside of your team. Get a friend or a family member to look it over who isn't involved in the project. That way you can make sure that it makes sense to somebody who doesn't know anything about the project. That way, if it makes sense to them, then hopefully it'll also make sense to the reviewer. Another trick is also reading it out loud. That way you're not just stuck on your own internal voice. And finally, tip number 10, follow directions. Proposals get tossed out sometimes for the silliest of reasons, forgetting to include a required document. Maybe the margins aren't the right size, or you've picked a different size font than what is requested, or a typeface. So make sure you really pay attention to those details and are following those directions. That way you actually have the chance to have your narrative read, and you don't get the points taken off or tossed out before they even read your narrative. And lastly, I want to tell you a little bit about the Ingram MicroGrant Support Program services and how you can access it by working with data networks. This program is a free service to customers at data networks, and what's available to you is that grants office will go out and research on your behalf actual technology-friendly grant opportunities that fit with your programmatic goals. So whatever it is, be it literacy, STEM education, college career readiness, school safety, you name it. You let us know and we can go out and find some opportunities at the federal, state, and foundation level for you. And what we'll do is put it together in a handy-dandy little report, which you can see pictured there. And it's going to have all the summary information of those grants. And then we like to follow that up with consultation, wherein we'll give you a few days to read through the report, but then we come back to the table and we sit down as a group and we talk about the report and its contents. It'll give you a chance to ask questions about grant opportunities, but also beyond that initial consultation where we talk about the grants and you can ask your questions, we're available to throughout the year to you for continual project and proposal development service. So as you're getting your ducks in a row, planning your project, if you have questions, you can reach out to us at any time. And as I said, the proposal development side of things, once the application is actually open and accepting proposals. One thing that we can do for you completely free of charge again is offer cursory review services for any technology-rich grant proposal that you write in-house. So again, getting that outside a set of eyes, it's very valuable. We here at Grants Office have a staff of grant writers who have written successfully for many of these state and federal grants in the past, and they've been reviewers, so they know both sides of the coin. They know what makes a successful proposal, and we're able to pass that along to you. It's not just a grammatical edit, but really taking a deep dive into the content and making sure you've got everything. And so to access support, all you have to do is get in contact with your local data networks representative today. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over for questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth. We do have a couple of questions here. The first one, the deadline for one of the grants we're interested in is passed. What can we do about that?
All right, that's an excellent question. It's one I get a lot. For many grant opportunities, the vast majority of them, they are annual or biannual grants. And so even if a grant deadline has passed, if you see that it's been funded pretty consistently in years past, do not worry. It will be back out again. You just have to wait a year or two for that solicitation to reopen. And during that time, definitely make use of it to start getting everything in line for your project, because again, the longer the runway you have to prepare a project, the stronger your proposal is going to be. When we do research for you guys, you might see on the report that some deadlines have passed. And again, we put that on there. That way you can look at the past year's solicitation and start planning your project well ahead of time before it gets stressful, because again, those details aren't going to change too much.
Great. And I assume there are potentially other similar grant opportunities out there that you could help with the researching.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And then the second question, where can I find a list of grant opportunities?
Well, there are a whole lot of different places that grant opportunities are published. State Department websites, the federal websites do that. Also grants.gov, that's kind of a clearinghouse for most federal grant opportunities. But if you don't feel like going and Googling for foundations or searching through Foundation Center or going to your state's Department of Education website or their labor website, if you don't want to sort through grants.gov, you can of course contact us through Data Networks, and we're happy to do the research for you. And again, take all the stress off of your shoulders by sorting through the opportunities and finding you the best fit based on your project description.
Great. And then the final question really takes us to our final slide, and that question is, who's my Data Networks contact? Well, your current Data Networks account executive would be your contact. And if you're not sure who that is, just give us a call at 800-283-6387, and we'll put you in touch with the right person. And some of the contact information is right here on this last slide. So with that, Elizabeth, I want to thank you again for a great presentation, and thank all of you for joining our webcast. Visit datanetworks.com or give us a call again at 800-283-6387 for more information on the program. Thank you.